Now, in the area, there were still 3 French armoured divisions in the reserve with around 600 tanks, and they were told to counterattack this German breakthrough and plug the gap. But the orders came through from a general who was already patently weeping down the telephone, which doesn't actually fill soldiers with faith. They were slow to refuel their vehicles, and they were slow to get moving to the attack. On the 14th of May, the RAF and the French bombers were ordered to attack the key bridges over the Meuse captured by the Germans, but were given insufficient fighter escort. It's known as the Sedan Massacre, as British and French bombers are hacked out of the skies, particularly the British Fairey battle bombers, which proved to be woefully inadequate for the task. Kleist was worried, however, and ordered Guderian again to halt. For the second time, Guderian is ordered by superiors to halt the advance, and again he refuses. Rommel's tanks attacked the French tanks where they were still refuelling and unable to move. Now, the French 1st Armoured Division had better tanks, with better guns than the Germans. But despite this, a tank that can't move is literally a sitting duck, and they lost 134 out of 170 of their tanks in a day, as Rommel brought up anti-tank guns to support his tanks. The French armoured forces had collapsed. The race for the sea was now on. German troops tried to race from the Ardennes towards the sea to cut off the French and Belgian armies, the French and British armies in Belgium. But the Luftwaffe still wasn't having its own way, and from the 10th to the 14th of May had lost 569 out of its 2,500 aircraft. More Allied aircraft were actually lost on the ground than in the sky. On the 14th of May, the city of Rotterdam was flattened by the Luftwaffe in a deliberate effort to bomb civilians. But that was actually by mistake. The order had been sent through to cancel the attack, but it arrived too late. 850 civilians were killed in Rotterdam. On the 15th of May, remember just 5 days into the battle, Reynard called Churchill to say, "We are beaten. We have lost the battle." The French had no reserves and had gambled everything on their line holding. It had been broken at Sedan, and now millions of men, the best of the French army, with the entire BEF, was poised to be encircled and cut off out of supply in Belgium. They still have barely fired a shot. On the 16th of May, Churchill flew to meet Reynard and Gamelin. They had already started to burn state papers in Paris. Churchill suggested that the dash of a few panzers, short of fuel, should be of small concern, and Gamelin agreed, and he said, yes, if counterattacks are ordered, but said that he had not yet ordered any counterattacks. Churchill asked, "Where is the strategic reserve?" Gamelin replied, "There is none." Churchill was dumbstruck and sent more planes to help France. The BEF and French armies that had advanced into Belgium were ordered to fall back from the Breda line, fall back from the Dial, and go back to the Escart line, to abandon Plan D and try and now choose Plan E, to turn back round and start to head back towards France, heading 40 miles further west. There had been almost no fighting along the River Dial. 2 million refugees were now on the roads, slowing the movement of the British and French. The Germans, of course, just machine-gunned people off the roads, and so didn't have much of a problem. On the 18th of May, these German panzers reached Cambrai. The French units in the area were surprised and surrendered. On the 20th of May, the Germans crossed the St. Quentin Canal and reached Abbeville. By the 21st of May, the British Chief of the Imperial General Staff, Ironside, suggested a counterattack. The British army would attack from the north, out of Belgium. The French would attack from the south, catching the Germans in a vice. The French general, Billot, was already, however, sunk in depression and did nothing to help organise the French attack from the south. The British attacked alone at Arras with what they had to hand, a single infantry and a single armoured battalion, with no air support. But even so, this small counterattack shocked the Germans. We have here the words of Rundstedt. It was feared that the armoured division would be cut off before the infantry could come up to support them. None of the French counterattacks were as serious as this. Rommel came close to being killed by a British tank, but the attack at Arras soon ran out of steam. Reynard kept on trying to save the French armies in Belgium. Daladier was sacked, as was Gamelin, replaced by General Weygand. Now, he was recalled from Syria. When he was given command in the fighting in northern France, he was still in Syria and had to fly quickly back to France. Pétain, that's the great general who had saved the French at Verdun, was recalled from Spain to be a symbol of resistance, where he was working as an ambassador and a hero to the French people. Now, Weygand was a whirlwind of energy. His first order was to clear the roads of refugees, which no one in the French command had actually thought to order before. But however, he needed to be briefed. He needed to understand the situation, to know where the units were. And so to save time, he started to tour the front lines by aircraft. But it was all too late. Weygand asked the Belgian army to take over more of the front along the Escaut to allow the British and French armies to shorten their lines and to strike south, beginning, he thought, on the 26th of May. But it was all far too late. The BEF supplies were landed at Le Havre, and that route to supply the British had already been cut, and the British army was starting to run low on food and ammunition in Belgium and northern France. It was in northern France already all over. On the 21st of May, the Germans turned towards Boulogne, Calais, and Dunkirk. At 12:45 that day, Hitler himself got hold of the panzer commanders and ordered them to halt. Guderian was speechless. One more day, and they'd have closed the trap and destroyed the British and French armies in the north. But Hitler could remember the area from his experiences in 1917 and 18, and believed the area to be too wet for tanks. Now, General Vallemont, his advisor, had actually been on there on holiday in the interwar era, but Hitler wouldn't listen to him when he said that the area had changed completely. The British managed to plug the gap by using Labour battalions, untrained soldiers, already on half rations. They'd been sent to France to dig trenches. They'd not yet been shown how to use a rifle. They'd not even been given rifles. These Labour battalions are made to quickly hand in their spades, given some spare rifles, and are told to defend the route to Dunkirk. The wounded had already begun to be evacuated from Dunkirk on the 19th of May. On the 22nd of May, Operation Dynamo, the evacuation of the British armies from Belgium, began. On the 23rd of May, Boulogne was evacuated. General Blanchard of the French First Army agreed to help Lord Gort, commander of the British Expeditionary Force, to help with the evacuation. From the 26th to the 27th of May, the British Army fell back towards Dunkirk, fighting by day, retreating by night. And that day, Britain called up the little ships to start trying to help with the evacuation. On the 25th of May, Churchill sends Spears, his advisor, to meet with Reynard and Weygand, and asks why nothing is being done to halt the German tanks. They suggest putting 75mm guns on the back of trucks to try and be used as mobile anti-tank guns, or asking French civilians to phone in when they see German tanks and say how many German tanks there are, where are they, and where are they going. Also asks why nothing's been done to blow up the bridges to halt the advance of the German tanks. Weygand replies, well, what interesting ideas, I'll consider them. And then there's the key meeting in Britain on the 26th of May. Halifax suggests negotiating an armistice via Italy with the Germans. They argue in cabinet for 2 days over whether to ask for an armistice to surrender to Germany. The war cabinet, the men who have to make this decision, are Halifax, Churchill, Chamberlain, and 2 members of the Labour Party, Attlee and Greenwood. Now, Halifax got angry that Churchill wouldn't even consider terms and threatened to resign. If he did resign, this would bring down the government. The key figure was Chamberlain. Would he support Halifax or Churchill? During the discussions in the meeting, the news arrives that Belgium has surrendered, leaving a huge gap in the lines, and that only 8,000 of the 500,000 British soldiers have managed to be evacuated. Now, despite the fact that clearly the situation is bleak, and the fact that Chamberlain and Halifax are close friends, Chamberlain crucially sides with Churchill, not with Halifax. Chamberlain sticks with him, and the crisis is past, and Halifax, not supported by Chamberlain, withdraws any threat of resignation.